The night in Mississippi was heavy with mist and silence. Yet behind the quiet surface, a story of blood and vengeance was slowly awakening. The year was 1849, and in Warren County cotton stretched across endless fields like a pale ocean, carrying with it the weight of human misery. On the banks of the great river stood the Riverside mansion, its white columns reflecting wealth, and its scented gardens hiding cries that no one dared to record. Inside those walls a wedding banquet was prepared, but the celebration would soon transform into a gathering of shadows. 17 members of powerful families would fall that night, not by chance, but by design, and at the center of it all was a woman who had once been invisible, a cook named Celia. What began as a life of servitude would twist into a tale of knowledge, grief, and calculated justice. Listen carefully, because this is not just a tale of food and fire. This is the account of a woman who turned recipes into weapons and sorrow into a sharpened blade. Before we continue, tell us in the comments where you are watching from. And if this is your first time on this channel, do not forget to subscribe, because more chapters of history that polite books avoid are waiting for you here. The Riverside plantation covered more than 2,000 acres, stretching along the muddy banks where barges carried cotton and sorrow. Its master, Colonel James Riverside, was tall and cold, a man who believed order could be built by mixing cruelty with carefully measured favors. 340 enslaved men, women, and children lived under his rule, and he believed each one a tool that could be managed like cattle. Yet the true jewel of the estate was not cotton, but cuisine. The name Riverside was known across the county not for its fields, but for its table, for the flavors that left politicians, merchants, and planters in awe. Behind that reputation was a woman most guests never saw. Celia had been bought as a child, only 8 years old, wide eyes filled with questions, taken from South Carolina when her family's life was crushed by debt. An elderly cook named Mama. Ruth recognized something rare in her, a memory for flavors and herbs, and from that moment the girl began a secret apprenticeship. Mama Ruth carried knowledge from Africa, knowledge of roots that healed, leaves that soothed, and others that carried darker purposes never spoken aloud. By the firelight, she taught the child that every plant had meaning. She also taught letters, tracing words in sand when the winter work slowed, showing the girl how words carried power that chains could never steal. For 16 years, Celia learned, watching, memorizing, gathering not only recipes, but wisdom. When Mama Ruth died, Celia stepped into her place with confidence that few expected from a woman who had grown in chains. By then she had a husband, Samuel the blacksmith, and 3 children, Thomas, Mary, and David. Her cabin was slightly larger than the rest, a small privilege for a cook whose skills fed reputations beyond the plantation gate. Celia's life seemed protected by her usefulness. The colonel would not risk selling her, and as long as she remained essential, her children seemed safe. But safety on plantations was a fragile illusion, one that could shatter in a single cruel moment. The colonel's son Addison had returned from study, a younger version of his father, but without restraint. His gaze lingered on young women in the kitchen, and his laughter carried a cruelty that made mothers clutch their children. Celia noticed. She moved her girls to tasks near her whenever he entered, but she could not protect every corner of the estate. Addison's cruelty soon turned toward the smallest, games he described as harmless lessons. He invited children to follow him, locking doors, testing power. Rumors spread quietly, eyes lowered in fear, until the day his games reached Celia's own family. That autumn, with leaves gold and air heavy with sugarcane scent, the disaster arrived. Celia's children had been playing near the barn, a building long unused. When smoke rose, she ran faster than she thought possible, heart hammering, but flames already consumed the structure. Screams came from within, voices she knew. Samuel held her back as the roof collapsed. Hours later, when embers cooled, 3 small bodies were found huddled together. Thomas had tried to shield his siblings, but no courage could stop the fire. The door had been locked from the outside. Witnesses recalled seeing Addison nearby that morning. Celia did not scream at him. She did not confront. She simply fell into silence. That silence hardened into something unbreakable. In her cabin. That night, she renamed herself Celia Washington, claiming the surname of the nation's first president, claiming identity and purpose. She vowed that justice would not be forgotten. Days turned to months. Celia worked as before, her hands steady, her dishes flawless, her voice quiet. But at night she walked to the ruins of the barn and whispered promises to the earth. She began collecting herbs Mama Ruth had once described, herbs that grew where death lingered. She stored them secretly, ground them into powders, hid them in jars marked as spices. She began small experiments. Doses slipped into Addison's meals, nothing deadly, only discomfort, pain in the stomach, sleepless nights. Doctors puzzled, blamed stress, blamed rich food. Celia listened behind doors and nearly smiled. As the new year approached, talk in the mansion turned toward celebration. Pearl Riverside, the Colonel's daughter, would marry Sylvester Thompson, son of another wealthy family. Invitations were sent, menus planned, wines ordered. The guest list grew, and Celia studied every name, every appetite, every sin. 17 guests in total, each one a participant in the system that had stolen her children. She mapped their fates in silence, crafting a plan not of chance, but of design. Addison would suffer slowest. The Colonel's allies would collapse at the table. Rosalind, the Colonel's wife, would fade in confusion. But the youngest children, innocent of guilt, would be spared. For them, Celia planned porridge sweetened with honey and mild herbs that would bring deep sleep before the main feast began. The wedding day arrived cold and bright, frost covering the fields like sugar on cake. Celia rose before dawn, commanding the kitchen as if conducting a battle. Every assistant moved with practiced steps, but only she touched the seasonings that mattered. Oysters, turtle soup, roasted pork, duck with cherry sauce, ham glazed with honey, puddings that melted on the tongue. Guests arrived dressed in silks, speaking loudly of crops and wealth, unaware of what waited behind polished silver. The ceremony in the garden passed with laughter and vows. Then all moved to the grand hall. Candles glowed against crystal and silver. Music floated, and Celia gave a signal. The children were served first, sweet bowls that soon left them yawning. Mothers led them upstairs to rest. The feast began. Oysters praised, soup applauded, laughter echoing. Celia watched from the doorway, eyes fixed on Addison as he lifted his fork. Hours passed, and then it began. Colonel Thompson turned pale, clutching his stomach mid-sentence. His wife gasped, seeing flames in her mind, hallucinations rising. The son struggled to move, limbs failing, while Addison felt searing pain grip. His body. Guests screamed, chairs fell, the hall filled with panic. Amid the chaos, Addison's eyes met Celia's. Understanding struck him. Terror widened his gaze, but no words came. Celia remained calm, then turned back into the kitchen, leaving the hall behind. By dawn, neighbors found 17 corpses across the dining room. Faces frozen in agony, bodies twisted, eyes still open. Only 3 children slept unharmed upstairs. On the table in the kitchen lay a note written in neat hand. For Thomas, Mary, and David, justice has been served. Celia Washington. Shockwaves tore through the South. Newspapers screamed of massacre. Planters whispered of fear. The sheriff described the scene as a nightmare from hell. Posters went up, a bounty placed, yet Celia had vanished into swamps and trails, known only to those who sought freedom. Samuel wept when shown the note, torn between pride and sorrow, admitting his wife had always carried strength beyond measure. Plantation society changed overnight. Families dismissed enslaved cooks, hiring outsiders. Dinners turned tense. Hosts tasted food before serving guests. Fear spread, trust shattered. Celia had broken the illusion that obedience was natural, that chains could silence forever. Rumors of her survival drifted across states, some claiming she reached Canada, others that she lived quietly under another name, helping others escape. Her exact fate vanished into mystery, but her legend remained. For planters, she was a nightmare, whispered in candlelight. For the enslaved, she was proof that memory and patience could strike back. The Riverside estate never recovered, its walls sold, its fields abandoned, but its story lived. Even today, when wind moves across Mississippi fields, locals whisper that they hear her footsteps, a woman who carried justice in her own hands. Now it is your turn to decide. Was Celia Washington's act true justice, or was it only revenge? Write your thoughts in the comments. Share this story with someone who believes the past is silent. And if you want more hidden chapters of history revealed, subscribe now, because stories like these will not be found in ordinary books, but only here where memory refuses to be erased.